it for, which I would like to make it to most of. So I guess I will just introduce myself quickly and then talk about sort of, I don't have like a PowerPoint, unfortunately, but I'm just gonna sort of talk about some strategies that the Stomp at Slumlords project in DC has used to increase our capacity since the pandemic began, and then hopefully those are applicable and we can discuss things that people are already sort of working with and the challenges you're encountering in the ways you want to build capacity specifically. But so my name's Rob. I'm one of the core organizers of the Stomp at Slumlords project in DC. So we began life as a working group of the local DSA and are still sort of affiliated, but have a sort of a weird autonomy the same way that Tank does. I don't know if anyone from there is around, but I know they're in this convention. So over the last 2 years, we have been trying to do tenant organizing and base building in the District of Columbia. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, we've just grown enormously in the scale of the organizing we're doing. And that's required us to create infrastructure that, allows us to operate at a larger scale. So, we start I think most groups, we just sort of had a slow start of talking at length to one building for many years and not really seeing many results. And yeah, I mean, I think it's important to sort of talk about the before and after of the pandemic, because it is really dramatic, the changes that we've seen. So in January of this year, we were operating in 5 or 6 apartment complexes around DC, depending on how you sort of slice it up and count it. And we had probably a dozen committed organizing volunteers who were each working in a team that was supporting 1 or 2 of these properties. But and we've written a lot about this. If you're sort of interested in the nitty gritty of what that organizing looked like, you can go to our website and read those reports. But looking back on it, before the pandemic, our organizing was at a very low scale. So we were operating in 5 or 6 buildings. One of those was a rent strike that began last fall, but it was a rent strike that included at best 20% of the property that we were working in. We were talking to more than 20% of the tenants, but most people we were talking to were just not ready for that. And so it was it's a weird situation to be on a rent strike that's a small minority without a lot of economic power. And then other than that, that was the most advanced organizing we had. Other than that, realistically, our organizing was really all about supporting these minoritarian activist tenants in all these buildings we were working with. We would have meetings and sustain relationships with tenants in these buildings, but the plan was, at best to have a lot of angry delegations and some small scale protests and try to hassle and harass the landlord into giving concessions. But also a lot of our strategy depended on stirring up the attention of the media or the reformist attorney general that we have here, and trying to sort of do this bank shot stuff to get the state to exert pressure on landlords to try to win concessions. But so in most of these struggles that we were involved in, we would support individual or cliques of activist types who would stir shit up, cause a ruckus, follow around the property manager, making a live stream video of the abusive things that they were doing, or try to interrupt the tours of buildings for new apartments, but prospective new tenant tours. So, and that, and that was at best. Then a lot of the times we were just talking people through the obstacles that were preventing them from even doing that. And we very rarely sustained stable organizations. Like we would have relationships and like sometimes we would like get people to meet, but we had just not been successful at fostering structures or an environment where people were like really coming together and effectively making collective decisions about what they were going to do that they then carried out. And so like we had ambitions and theories about like how we wanted to like, you know, like what organizing versus activism was. But I think the vast majority of cases, we were just like hitting this low ceiling of capacity. Like we just didn't really know how to increase the scale of what we were doing or push beyond that level to like the things we aspired to do, like rent strikes that would like get majority support and like sort of effective pressure on the state from the outside instead of just sort of like public relations strategy. So the things changed when the pandemic hit in like a dramatic way. And I think that like everyone has experienced that probably, but it's just like in the past, we would, you know, like the way we would start to like do new organizing would be like like we canvassed all the time to people who are being evicted. And in the course of, or like people who had been sued for eviction, we would like talk to them before their court date. Like this was our regular canvas program we did all the time. So we did this just generalized know your rights canvas to people who are at risk of eviction. And we would have conversations about like, what are the problems here? Like, what do you think of the landlord and the neighbors? What's going on in your life? And we would try to build from there. We had never been in a situation where people were like coming to us being like, please help us organize. Like we want to fight the landlord. But suddenly like the hotline just like blew up. And, you know, I mean, like there was a sudden demand for organizing and like a readiness to take like extremely militant action at a large scale, or just to there was like, we were surprised to suddenly encounter like all of these people who were like ready to go fight the landlord and make a demand and had a disposition that was just like not what we had expected from people. It came as a real surprise. It was very new. It was clear that just the historical circumstances had changed what people expected. And so like suddenly we were like, yeah, there was just this like new wave of this like whole new wave of tenants who wanted to get organized. And like, we really struggled to like try to catch up with people where they were. And like, we were not able to sustain contact with probably even most of the people who called our hotline in like between like from like March 15th or whatever, like when like the pandemic was declared, the city went on lockdown, like big layoffs started. For about a month, and like the middle of March, the middle of April, we would just get multiple calls every day of people calling and saying like, we want to organize. That's a great question. How did we advertise the hotline? We made flyers that we just distributed widely. We also had an organizer go on Telemundo, like the local news on Telemundo, and just like gave a little talk about how we were worried there were going to be all these evictions. And we got 100 calls in the next 24 hours from tenants who wanted to organize their building. And probably got like 5 buildings with like active leads. Like probably 5 of those 100 are in buildings that we're still organizing in. And like, yeah, I mean, that is like, what if we had the capacity to like actually follow up with like 100 tenants calling us at that time? It is nice to think about, but like, you know, we were totally overwhelmed by that. And then we continued to get, it wasn't just there was one day, but like we did continue to get like calls for, you know, weeks on end. So, I mean, and like normally like a hotline, I don't know, like how many of us have a hotline we advertise? Like we had this SOS hotline for a year and a half, 2 years. We almost never got calls on it until suddenly we were getting 100 calls in a day. And so like we should do, all right, I'm going to try to not answer these questions as they come in, and like maybe we can take like breaks to do questions. I just want to make sure I like get through explaining everything in the time that we've got. So we had to deal with this like new demand for organizing that we had never anticipated before all of a sudden. And so like, I think there are sort of three major things that we started doing. And I guess before I get into like the specifics, I want to say, I think like we didn't catch everybody, but in a lot of ways we did rise to the occasion. So like we started to, like we were able to work with enough of the people who called in that period that this, we were organizing in arguably 6 buildings in January. Now we're working in like 17 or 18, and we're like pursuing a few new leads. And we've expanded from just being in the district to like having new groups out in the suburbs where like actually the majority of the people in this metro area live. And there are several buildings that we have organizing volunteers working in where there are majorities on rent strike and have been for months and are winning major concessions. So there are like a few buildings where it's like majorities on rent strike, probably 10 buildings where we have like significant minorities of people who are committed to the rent strike. It's like complicated because like so many people are just not paying out of necessity, but like we've figured out how to kind of organize that into a more conscious strike. And then, there are like other places where we're like not there yet, but like clearly building towards it. And, like we're able to consistently have meetings with, dozens of people coming out and then like effectively mobilizing dozens more people to come to protest at landlords' houses, to do like these citywide actions. We were able to push 150 people out of the buildings that were organizing into a big rally in July. And then we had like, 50 other socialists and a bunch of other people from the community. And, we are able to have these like very large scale actions now. We're able to like exert a lot of economic power in the buildings we're organizing in. So we're like getting major repairs done. In a few places, we've like driven out the property managers. There is one building we're in where like the landlord just unilaterally told everyone that rent counts double. So if they pay, like you pay $1,000 rent, it counts for like another $1,000 in addition to that is like wiped out. And there are like other places where like there are sort of these like more concessionary payment plans being offered, and they're being rejected. And like we're like are actually able to get like majorities of buildings to like reject these fairly generous payment plans where people would like get some back rent deducted in favor of like bargaining for more. So the level of thing of like, we're just able to struggle at a much more advanced level and like win more than we really were able to in the past, and mobilize people on a really unfamiliar scale. And I think, like obviously a lot of that has to do with just like circumstances change, like historic crisis intervened, and it like changed people's expectations and changed social norms, and like it's like legitimately historic forces just like changed what was possible. But I think like we were able to rise to the occasion in a meaningful way because we changed what we were doing and changed our expectations. And I think that there were like 3 core ways that we expanded the capacity of the organizing we're doing since the pandemic began. And like, these are things we are like aspiring to do more of. So one thing we're doing is like seriously focusing on the leadership of the tenants in the buildings that we're organizing. Like we've like raised our expectations for what leaders or like what it even means to be a leader. And we've refined like what our organizers focus on trying to get people to do. And we've just changed the way that we approach, like really everything about just relationships with the people that we're trying to mobilize. And we've just become a lot more oriented to trying to get our contacts to like get majorities of their neighbors involved. Like we've like turned away from sort of like a premature focus on like making demands and like taking public action in favor of asking initial contacts to like try to get like go to the neighbors, like really talk to them, work on forming relationships and identify the social groups that are going to like mobilize a majority. And so, you know, we've oriented away from like working with, and I think like in the past, we talked a lot about this like activist organizer distinction without really following through on it. But like we just like oriented away from talking a lot to people who wanted to like immediately take action, or like encouraging the impulse to immediately take action, which is definitely something we've done before, in favor, or like, and certainly we were like, you know, I think we were helped because in the past, it was always possible to like connect people with like some legal resource, or like there were like useful legal paths available to people. And so it was sort of like easy to like, you know, like let like sort of legal strategies instead of organizing strategies dominate the conversation about what we were going to do. Since the pandemic began, a lot, I mean, you know, people simply weren't like, there was people had this critical problem that there was no actual solution to, like no legal solution. And so like, sort of due to circumstance, sort of due to just like like rethinking what we were doing, we really started focusing on building committees of leaders and like actively trying to recruit, like trying to like talking to people with an eye to identifying who like the social group leaders were, and like understanding the contours of social groups that did exist. And then trying to bring leaders together, like figuring out who the leaders are and bringing them together in a way that has a plan to like get a majority. So that was like something we talked about before, but like since the pandemic, it's become much more of a like central, it's just like by necessity, like in that time where we had like many people calling us all the time, we would ask everybody like, okay, like you need to go like get more people on board and we'll go from there. And we really could only focus on following up with the people who were able to like demonstrate like I can go talk to my neighbors and like bring numbers to the table. So we were just like forced to do this this sort of like, you know, we had to like sort of pick and choose like where we were focusing our attention for follow-up, and we focused on people who had followers and identifying leaders that way. Okay, so like orienting towards organic leaders in a more serious way was the first big change we made. The second, like, so in this period, we moved from having like a dozen organizing volunteers who were putting in like 10 plus hours a week on this project to having more than 30. So we had a lot of volunteers, like we had a lot of people who just like felt called to organize, like felt this like, you know, it's just like they made the decision at this point that they like wanted to devote significant energy to this. And like a lot of people who were just like laid off and like wanted, you know, like wanted to feel connected to something. That was certainly my case. I mean, I was involved before, but I was like, you know, a lot, like, so a lot of people just sort of like jumped in for the first time. And also like, you know, like we were in you know, so like, I'll explain that in a minute. I think like the important thing is that like we needed to expand our organizing group dramatically in a short period of time. And that led us to really want to like I think those of us who'd been at it for a long time thought about like what do we wish in retrospect had been in place when we first started doing this. And like the main thing we felt was like training, like some introduction to like the tools and like just like expectations of like what we were getting into. And we had done like we had already been in the process of like scaling up our training and had like refined a series of skills we wanted to work on. But come like April of this year, we realized we needed to apply that in a more serious way. And so we set up a training program that met every week and like assigned homework and like really forced people to like do this public discussion of like what they were working on, like come and talk to the rest of the group frequently about like what your organizing look like, what's the problem you're encountering, and then we would workshop it and like work on the hard skills of like how to do this stuff. And I think that's been really fruitful. I am going to, so turns out talking this much is kind of thirsty work. I'm going to go get some water. So I'm going to pause for a minute. If anyone has a question, drop it in the chat right now. Once I think we can do, well, I'll stop to do some question and answer soon. Is that cool? I'm in charge here, so. All right, I'm operating without notes. I forgot this was right here. Sorry for the interruption. So we started doing this training program. We started doing it a lot more frequently. It seems like a lot of people have like also gotten up to like get water and stuff. So I'm going to actually pause for a minute. If anyone else has a question, drop it now. I'll review it, and then like we can start on that when I pause. Okay, I'm going to get started again. Cool. Okay, I should specify. We are on thing 2 of the 3 things I was talking about, which is the training. So like the first major change was, and I think like all of these things are interrelated, but like the first major thing we did was like change the expectations of like, we focused on leadership in a more serious way and like activating organic leaders. Like, I mean, this is like, then, so leadership was crucial. Training, the third thing is going to be structure. Like we just like restructured how things work, and or like I should really just say structured. But like, so we're currently on training. So I just want to like sort of touch on like what we were training people on. Basically, we just like lifted a lot of stuff from union organizer trainings. Like we had already been sort of like working on a basic, like we had sort of taken a lot of stuff out of the Secrets of a Successful Organizer toolkit from labor notes and like changed some of the proper nouns and thinking like, just like concepts. And then also like over the last year, a number of the people in our group, like a bunch of our core members, like salted with Unite Here, including me. And we absorbed a lot of like Unite Here's training model, which, is like, it like shares a lot in common with like what labor notes preaches. Maybe that's like politically controversial. I don't know. And like, you know, like we read like the Jane McAlevey book and just like got a lot of like union organizer common sense, and then applied that to what we were doing. And like, you know, like a lot of friends from Unite here like sort of helped like write a curriculum from the for like the training we did, and just like figure out what we were doing. It's like a weird convergence. Like Unite here was also organizing a rent strike suddenly in the Northern Virginia suburbs. So, you know, I mean, the things we focused on were like, especially one-on-one oriented. And we really started training people on how to do one-on-ones. And like identify leaders, move people to action through one-on-ones, build committees, and like using like agitation and inoculation and like sharing stories in a much more like aggressive and emotionally serious way than we had in the past. Like thinking about like how to deal with like fear and despair and like how to relate to people, you know, like just working, I think working both on like, yeah, just like working in this way of like thinking more seriously about like what are the tools we can like really use to like push and inspire people to take like super risky, difficult action, and to just like refine our ability to push. That was something, you know, that, and I think that just like that helped. That was like probably like the most important part of our like capacity building, was that we just like honed in on the skills and just practically got better at like moving people to action and pushing through all the hard shit that disorganizes people in the course of any campaign. You know, I'm sure everyone here is well familiar with all that. So yeah, and we've continued to run that training program and are like sort of constantly rethinking like how it's going to work, but it like allows us to like bring in a lot of people quickly, and then like have an expectation that they're going to not be able to operate alone, but like operate, like play a more, like we know we can like trust people more to, you know, come into our training and then go out and like be organizing. And I saw a question before sort of about like committed activist versus like leaders who come up from the ranks. And I think the reality is that like having a good training program allows you to absorb both of those groups. Like, so, you know, you might have to like structure things a little differently for like, or like, you know, it just, I don't know, like we kind of have different tracks right now for like leftists and building leaders, but like we're very consciously trying to bring those groups together. And at some point we'd like our training program to sort of can include both all the time. But like, once you figure out how to train people, you can like bring both groups along and like aspire to that kind of unity, you know. Otherwise it's like, you know, yeah, it's just like so the training is like fundamental to like turning everybody, the like organic leaders and the like sympathetic activists versus it like into organizers who we can like really trust that they're like part of this project out in the world. Okay. And part of the reason we can trust people is because of the third aspect, structure. So we've also like created a much more robust structure of like, you know, personal relationships and internal communication, where everybody has a leader that they're talking to. Like each organizing group has like a leader that they're like a leader in the project that they're going to like check in with on a regular basis. And then most of those leaders have like somebody they're going to check in. And like, you know, then we have sort of this like inner council that like has a regular check-in to like share everything that's going on. But like, you know, we have a kind of like cellular structure now. And we have a lot like through that, there's like each organizing team is sort of reporting to someone who's then like talking about how all of these things like fit together into an integrated strategy. And like we like identify the problems that are popping up in different places, and then we try to come up with like we try to like come up with like we use everybody's brain power to like think through those problems, and then we like try to like address things in a strategic and structured way all over the city. And so yeah, that's just like, it means that like that like having that structure helps ensure that like, it's like what makes like a mass mobilization possible. Like that's like how we can bring like a lot of people out to like a rally and like effectively make political demands. It's also like how we ensure that like everybody's in the training. It's also how we like set expectations for like how we're going to bargain. Because like anytime we get an offer from a landlord, like everybody knows about it pretty quickly. It kind of like moves through this phone tree. It's like discussed by everybody. Everybody, all these like different organizers around the city are able to sort of like set a standard for what we're bargaining for and like inform people when like concessions are won in one place. And that makes it like more possible to like reject some offer because we can say like, well, okay, like your landlord is offering this payment plan. The landlord at New Hampshire and First offered this much more beneficial, this much more generous payment plan with forgave back rent. And there they didn't sign it because they didn't think it was a good enough offer. And like by being able to circulate that information, like it just like helped bring all like create this consciousness of a citywide movement among the like people that we, among like the organic leaders in the buildings. And like now we're at the point where we're like like we've been this sort of like political organization, but we're trying to like create more of like a mass like an organization that like really is like that like had like where we like formalize the sort of like leadership in all these buildings and like build a citywide committee and like the I'm from the Stomp at Slumlords project, and they say, sorry, it's hard for me not to answer these questions when they come in. So like now we're like going to like launch this like citywide committee. We're in the process of taking a bunch of citywide actions. Like we're inaugurating this like new phase in the struggle. That's like, but like, it's now with a group of people who are already leaders, who are like leading, like each are leading like dozens of other tenants in these long-term struggles and like have all this experience and are like really prepared now for like this new phase. And like they're all connected because there's this sort of like organizing structure that's been like fostering like more coming together over the last few months. So yeah, I mean, it's just like the structure kind of ties together these other elements, but it's just like really important that we focused on like having regular check-ins for all of our organizers and like making sure that there's just like that like every volunteer organizer is in a team that's like talking regularly and has like a sense of its responsibilities and is like regularly checking in with someone else who's like going to help them think through the problems and also like try to get them to like, or like just get them to like, participate in like citywide actions, like citywide meetings. And it just, like that, it means that like volunteers don't feel like kind of isolated or like that they're dealing with like insuperable problems because they just like aren't getting the help they need. And so yeah, that's like the other way that we've just like integrated this like huge influx of people who like want to get involved and like have actually been able to help them flourish and succeed. Yeah, so I think that those are like, that's like the key to the increased capacity. It's the focusing on the recruitment and training of organic leadership, seriously training organizers, and then creating a structure to like support the organizers over time and like make sure that there's like a real collective strategy that's going on that like everybody's participating in and that everyone like feels included in and that like has had a chance to like have their say about. So yeah, I guess there we can pause for questions. I know that there have been a lot in the chat, so let me just start to get to those. Okay. Can Mitch in Denver share a little bit more about what you like? I'm interested in the question you put in the chat, but it might be more helpful to hear like what, you know, like what were the expectations? Where were they coming from when you were first having meetings during the beginning of the pandemic?
Yeah, we held an outdoor meeting at a pretty large complex in Denver where we had been doing organizing for some time, but I know turnover's pretty high there, so you're always getting new tenants involved. And the first meeting that we tried to hold, it just like going from that meeting to the second meeting, there were almost, besides like that sort of like more activist oriented people in the complex, like it was almost complete turnover. Like the people who showed up to the first meeting did not show up to the second, and it felt like a lot of the comments coming out of the meetings were, you know, really oriented about like how are we going to take action now, as opposed to how to, you know, doing sort of like the work you're talking about of like asking people, hey, like bring more people next time. You know, I don't know. I felt like maybe where we messed up was not making the organizing pitch. But I feel like we've run into difficulties like making that pitch when people kind of show up. They're like, you know, my people in intense need. Like, how is this something I can buy into if this is not helping me right now? Oh, I think you're on mute.
I am on mute. Yes. Yeah, I that really resonates with a lot of conversations that we'd had. I mean, I think that like there were a couple of things that I think we ran into that kind of situation. There were like a few things we tried to do. Like one was when people raised the like when people were like, oh, we got to do something now, like we need to we need to know what's going to happen, like are they going to cancel rent or not, like I can't pay, I'm like really freaked out. Like a lot of it was like we would sort of try to like answer that by saying, well, like, this is why we need to go organize a majority of people. Like, yeah, you can't be like, rent is not canceled. But can you pay? And then like just like, you know, focusing on like really agitating people in a deeper way, and like trying to turn that like sense of panic into a resolve to try to organize, to go talk to more neighbors. Because like people would say, you know, it's like I wouldn't say that we had like a lot of demands of like what's gonna happen, like what like is like how what's your idea of how, like people were in a panic. I don't think that like there was like a natural orientation to like let's go circulate a petition and get all the neighbors to agree to this. But like, you know, we thought like it's like we were sort of making the argument with people like, you're gonna be like, you're in this situation, you know that lots of your neighbors are too. You're not going to be able to pay. The landlord is certainly not going to tell you not to pay. Like they definitely want you to pay. They're clearly pressuring you to do so. So like you need to push back. You need to get neighbors on board. Are they going to take you seriously alone? Probably not. Like what is the power you need? And that like we would have, you know, that's the conversation we would have with people. But also, you know, we did a lot more like outside of having meetings, like we were just intensively trying to do one-on-ones with people from the beginning, like from the beginning of getting all these people in. We would like, you know, people would call us. We would like try to get them to go get more neighbors, give us the phone numbers of neighbors, get neighbors to sign petitions, like get neighbors to call us directly, but like go spread the word about our existence. And so like that led to our organizers having tons and tons of conversations with lots of different people. And like, we tried to like really hone in on people who seemed to be at the center of a lot of social networks and like or like just people who seem to have some leadership capacity, either already be leaders of groups or like have the interest in going out and talking to lots of people and like forming a group that would involve lots of their neighbors. So yeah, and so like we just did a lot of like trying, it's like we didn't have a lot, like we weren't having meetings where we would just like put out a flyer to see who would come. Like we really tried to make sure that people that we thought were the ones who were going to like mobilize lots of people, we like really tried to make sure that those were the people who were in the meetings, and we like actively recruited those people and did serious one-on-ones and serious recruitment conversations to get them to come. So yeah, like, so I think that like we looked at meetings as like times to like bring together the actual leaders that we've identified through a lot of like one-on-one conversations. And yeah, I mean, like it paid off, it's like looking back, I think we had a lot of like inadvisable meetings in the past where we just like weren't really doing the work to like, we were calling for these things, but there wasn't like we were having meetings that were like apart from like having a real structure that was going to come together and actually exercise leadership in the building. And so that's like a big change that's happened. And I think a lot of that also happened because like for the first many months of this, we were mostly operating like over the phone and on Zoom. So it was like a giant pain in the ass to get meetings at all. So we could practically really only have meetings that involved like ultra committed people who really cared and were down with the program. And so that's what like our meetings became. Anyway, I mean, yeah, that's what I would say about that. I hope that's helpful. I don't know, Mitch, do you have any follow-up on that?
No, I think that was all, yeah, really helpful. And definitely the view of that, where you're talking about having inadvisable meetings in the past.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's kind of resonated in some of the organizing that we've done, where we're kind of just maybe not putting that being as intentional as we should be about what those spaces are for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool. Let's see. I just like encourage people to put questions or discussion things in the chat. And if people want to have like, I mean, if people want also just like have like want to make a comment, you can try to get on Stack. I guess I'm like facilitating this too now. Alex in Durham, would you mind saying a little bit more about like your experience trying to involve more like tenant leaders in the structure of your program?
Sure. Yeah. So I think the like limitation of this example of like of what we're up to in Durham is like we started organizing 2.5 months ago and are still just like beginning to put together beginning to even just like confront some of these challenges for the first time. Our challenge is like there are a couple of core volunteer organizers with enough of a skill set to like be able to do like solid organizing and sort of like go into an apartment complex and sort of do exactly the steps that you're talking about. Find leaders, discover the issues that the leaders care about, bring them together, start to identify like how do we thread these together. In 2 of the apartment complexes that we've been organizing in, they have come up with a petition with a couple of like apartment specific demands for their landlord and are like currently, circulating the petition and beginning to think about like, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to like deliver this petition to the landlord? And our challenge is like in wanting to scale this up beyond the couple of apartment complexes that we're working in, we need to, we're thinking that we need to develop more of like the activists, like leftists who are drawn to this project, who are capable of being good organizers. And we're starting to think through some of the trainings that like, I'm glad that you referenced was like a really effective thing for Stomp Out Slumlords, because that's sort of like where our heads are at right now of like what our priorities should be. We're like, and also we are recognizing that if we rely on just like interested leftists and coming into the project and training them up, like we will not be able to meet like the scale that we want to. And what has been happening is like, in the apartment complexes where like we are sort of like seeing the most success, we have like a couple of leaders who are really stepping up and who are invested in the project. And like, I guess I don't know how to say, we like there's just a large divide between like the number of like interested activists and the tenants, and we have like constructed that divide like pretty like on purpose. Like the asks that we make of activists recently have been like, go and knock doors on a new apartment complex that we like haven't talked to anybody before, to just like see if this is a good place to do sustained organizing in. And for the tenant leaders, the asks are always like, talk to your direct neighbors and figure out how you can advance this direct building campaign. And like over the course of like doing that, like the tenant leaders are being developed in their ability to be, you know, advancing a campaign, running a committee. And well, yeah, that's just what's happening right now. I guess I lost a little bit of track of like what your specific like question was trying to cut to. I think that our hope is to be able to bring tenants into like beyond running a campaign in their own apartment complex, like bring them out to go canvass a new apartment complex, you know, maybe in a building run by the same landlord, or maybe it's like, you know, a separate, like different public facing campaign against like particular elected officials over particular policies down the road. Like these are questions that we're thinking about, and things that we're not like holding super tightly right now, or like there aren't really sharp tensions in the work just because we're a really new organization, but we're just trying to think about like, what are the foundational pieces and like sort of structures or practices that we can be putting in place to like make the divide between like leftist activist type and like tenant leader like a little bit less stark.
Yeah, so that is like, I'm not sure that I have like any special insight into that. That is like also a thing we struggle with, and I would invite anyone else who wants to like offer feedback on that. I will say that like, to some of your specific points, like I think we try really to focus, like when we get into contact with like, you know, like people who want to organize their buildings, we very much like want, like we've only started to have the discussion about getting people to like go canvass other buildings, like operate like outside, like organizing their immediate neighbors. We've only tried to do that in circumstances where like everything's on total lock in their building. Like we have big majorities of people committed to a rent strike. Like we you know, like things are like really reliable, and we like are convinced that we have like the clear majority of the tenants behind us. And only under those circumstances do we start like moving people from like, that's the only time when we like really start concentrating on like sending them to go like organize new turf. Like we want to make sure the places we're organizing within like in are like well organized before we try to like move on to like getting like expanding. So like our like leftist volunteer types are like, they are not like for the most part checking out new leads. They are like rooted in a building or in a complex, in a place where they have like relationships, and they're going to be like working for a long time. And so like they're like paired with like a group of the like organic leaders in that building, and like those people like, you know, they you know, they get to know each other over time, and like, you know, it's just like so that like I think working out like actual personal relationships like helps bridge some of the like structural divide in what our work is, because it's like people like all the leftist volunteers in our project are spending more time with like the organic leaders in the building that they work with than they are with other leftists in the project. and I think that it's just like, I think it's worth taking time and like investing in like property level organizing and make sure that people are like you're really developing people's leadership before trying to like move to like larger political structures. That's like been our experience. It's just like worked better to like get people to like really get comfortable exercising like the social power that they can exercise like when they get a majority of their like neighbors working together on these campaigns, and then from there move on to like a sort of higher level citywide organizing more buildings. But yeah, I mean, just one man's opinion. I know that like lots of us I think are dealing with this. There's also like more shades of gray between like organic leaders and like leftists. It's like people have like I guess I should say, but certainly not something we've like unlocked the secret of. Yeah, let's check for more. I'm going to review the questions some more. Does anyone else have anything to say on like bridging that gap? Yeah, the problem of secrecy is just like not like we have not like it's very interesting, like I've like been part of like underground union organizing campaigns. I like it's like a concept that it's just like we didn't like everywhere we went, we were like extremely public. And I realized that that's like a privilege we have being in the district, which has like extremely strong on paper tenants rights. Like the rent is crazy high and conditions suck a lot of the time, but like it's hard to evict people. Like you have formal rights to organize. And so like that's like not a problem to deal with. If you'd like to speak to that though, I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about it. That was Joe M. I don't know if there's more discussion to have there. Okay, going to have to click. Yes. Rachel asks about structure tests. So yes, definitely. Like structure tests, it's not like that's not vocabulary that like, it's like whatever. Like we can talk about like who our favorite author is all day. Like I got trained in a different school than like McAlevey. So like the structure test is not like the vocabulary I personally use, but this idea that like in the course of developing our capacity, like we need to like get people to take action to like, just to like see if we're able to take collective action. So like before we could rent strike, or like in the course of like trying to like get there to be concerted action of like non-payment, and before like people were like offered payment plans and stuff, like we were trying to like make sure everyone signs a petition, everyone will like call the landlord, everyone will like fill out a letter saying like, no, I don't want this, whatever. Like we were constantly sort of like giving, like leaders were given assignments to go get their neighbors to do stuff. And that like constantly kept the organization active and like also created feedback of like who's actually talking to neighbors. Cause that's like something we had been blindsided in the past by like thinking people had like gotten their neighbors on board when they really hadn't. So yeah, structure tests in different names are like something that's very important to us. So, okay. We do not have like training materials right now. We have very disorganized like internal notes that I'd be embarrassed to share and that we don't like, I don't think it would be helpful. I mean, we aspire to write something up about this. Like, one thing we've done throughout the course of the project is sort of like write these reports where we explain what we're doing. So hopefully we are going to like have the wherewithal to publish something like that soon, though I can't promise. I will say that there are like a couple of like, I mean, I will like, it would be useless for us to produce the materials because honestly, like you can go through, like there are just like a couple of training programs that I would stand behind. Like you could like, the McAlevey stuff is good. The labor notes stuff is good. The IWW training program is good. A lot of tools from Unite Here are good. I'm sure that there are other like good labor like training structures. I think that like the key thing is also like to give life to a training program, you need people who've like been through it a lot and just like can sort of have the skills to like connect, can like connect the like doctrine to like the practical examples that people are going to be bringing up all the time. But I would really, I mean, I would recommend like above all, like sort of looking at these like existing training models, seeing what resonates, and like trying to start like explaining to yourself and like developing your own like set of tools for like how you would explain how to like fight and win somewhere. And I just like recommend like trying to find ways to like get that experience and get trained. So, go salt somewhere or something. What concepts are most important to cover in a training curriculum? That is a really good question. I mean, I think like what was key for us was like focusing on one-on-ones, like what to do in a one-on-one. Signal, am I frozen now?
I can hear you fine.
No, you're back.
Great. I'm sorry for the insane technical difficulties. This is just like has been my fate throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. I struggle a lot. I'm sorry that you all have to join my struggles. So I was talking about like what specifically we had focused on training people about. I mean, I can like in a second, I'll sort of share like some core skills we focused on, but I think like there's like a new set of problems we were thinking about, which is basically like, what is it that's holding people back? Like what makes it hard to like get people like why aren't people predisposed to like join the struggle, fight for the cancellation of rent and like the abolition of the wage system? And like dealing with our bet, I think it's paid off, is that like what's holding people back is like, I mean, it's like fear, it's despair, it's isolation, it's like a lack of confidence in like the ability to win. Like people experience a lot of just like emotional barriers to organizing. Like people are actively disorganized by like all the like ideological apparatuses of capitalist society. So like they have this like most people most of the time have like an innate sense that like the system is going to beat them if they rise up against it. And so like people need to like feel that like change is possible. And there's like all of this like emotional inner struggle wrapped up in that. And like we need to like really be able to reckon with people's feelings and like not just try to like make the argument for like why organizing is good and why we should all work together, but to like confront the fear and the despair and everything else that's like holding people back. And so we really like were thinking about, we had to think a lot about just like, like learning to, I think it's like, it's funny. It's like not a thing that like a lot, like it's like maybe it's a particular problem for leftists. I don't know. Like it required like getting into some uncomfortable territory for people in terms of like just opening up more and being willing to like talk with other people about like the really serious bad feelings that like the situation and like the prospect of confronting the landlord like provoked for them. So we talked a lot about like in terms of like practical stuff we talked a lot about like storytelling and like like learning to talk about like what was going on in our own lives, our own like feelings about the struggle, and just sort of like past experiences that like informed how we think about like the fight that we're in. Just like getting people to open up more in order to like inaugurate deeper conversations with like the people we were trying to organize. Story sharing was like very important, and doing it in an authentic way. I think like just asking deeper questions, like probing more, and like learning to really like try to learn about people when we talk to them, and like ask the questions that like get to their like deep-seated motivations, fears, aspirations, whatever. So like just the practice of what questions to ask, how to do that in a one-on-one context, like how to ask questions in a way that's agitational, and just like agitation in general was a skill we focused on a lot. Pushing and like understanding the no, just like what to do, like how to actually like when people weren't convinced, like how to try to convince them, and like how to sort of like, you know, like use what we've learned about people in the course of like having these long conversations. So yeah, I mean, like that, I think a lot of that just like basic one-on-one skills. Inoculation, that was a really big one that I think that was a step people skipped a lot to their misfortune. So yeah, I'd say, I mean, it was sort of like one-on-ones in general, agitation, the mic's on, telling, inoculation, pushing, like the whole section on sort of like understanding the no and thinking through like why people were saying no to us. You know, like, and in the course of doing this, like lots and lots of role plays, lots of workshopping of like how people were doing it. You know, and then some like not one-on-one oriented trainings on like how to run meetings effectively, how to do delegations. You know, we're working on doing one on conflict resolution. So just like trying to like deal with the you know, just like stuff people are trying to implement. Inoculation. Oh, okay, yeah. Like inoculation is like it's like a step in organizing where you prepare people for like the backlash that they're going to face for stepping out of line. And, you know, like that's happened everywhere that we're seriously organizing. Like people have gotten threatening letters. They've gotten like the landlord coming around yelling at them. They've gotten like the denial of maintenance. They've got like they're faced constantly with the fear that they'll be evicted. So, you know, like people like the organizing causes a backlash. We need to be prepared for that. So inoculation means talking with people about like what's going to happen when we fight and getting them prepared to withstand that. So that's like a really important step. I think it's like, if you skip it, it can be really bad because like you know, people deliver a petition and then they get the threatening letter and then that's the end of things because they don't want to stand up to intimidation. So a very important thing. I mean, again, you know, that's like inoculation is something I think that you'll find as like a basic, it's like one of the core skills that any like union organizer training, like the IWW program or Secrets of a Successful Organizer has lots on this because it's like labor unions have to deal with it. I think, you know, it's just in general, like looking to that like tool set has proved to be really useful for us because it's just like, we find a lot of the same problems in the kind of organizing we're doing now. Just gonna check on the questions. If anyone has questions, I'd encourage you to put them in now. Or like, if you think I'm wrong and you want to denounce me, you can get
Rob, I've got a question for you.
Okay.
The list of like retaliatory actions that you just rattled off was like pretty clarifying and helpful. I'm wondering, like, I would imagine that when y'all are organizing a building and some of your leaders are getting some retaliation from the landlord, it becomes probably pretty difficult to like not just get bogged down in like defending that one person situation and like keep moving forward with like building like unity in action of the broader set of tenants. And I'm wondering, like, are there like, you know, either like principles that you use to like figure out like how to move in those kinds of moments, or like conversational hooks to kind of like get a person on board with like, this is why we need to keep moving in this direction? Like, I guess in Durham, we haven't faced that yet, but I imagine that we're going to soon. And that's something that like, personally, like I don't feel prepared for like catching that.
Yeah, I mean, so like we like, I mean, the lucky thing, the difference between like, I mean, actually, I don't know like where people are. In DC, we've sustained an eviction moratorium for like a long time, and we have pretty robust like anti-retaliation laws on the books. So like people have a lot of legal rights. If it comes down to it, like you can't be evicted for organizing, and like people have specifically a lot of protection right now. So like, and some people, you know, it's like there are advantages to organizing in like a relatively liberal jurisdiction where that's the case. I think like, so, I mean, I think that like the thing we try to use when people face like specific, like targeted retaliation, like we try to use that as like agitation for like recommitting to, you know, focusing on the collective struggle. And like trying to like, because we know that people like, we know like a lot of the threats that people get are empty threats. Or like there's sort of like low level retaliation of just like, you know, personal harassment or like the denial of maintenance, but like people aren't worried that they're going to be evicted. In those cases, like we, you know, like we you know, like we're just sort of like playing off, like we're blowing this stuff off. It's like, yeah, the landlord is just like bullshitting you because he's scared. This is why we need to get everybody on board, because like you shouldn't tolerate this like outrageous treatment from this guy who doesn't respect you. And that was the conversation we could have. And we didn't, you know, it's like we knew that people were relatively safe. Now, one thing I will say is like, you know, we have done some like dramatic direct actions. Like we did a couple of like just direct actions stopping illegal evictions in the suburbs. And like, we were able to get some tenant leaders to come to those, and the tenant leaders who came to those, I think, had a sense afterwards that like they were much more confident because they saw like a big crowd of people like pushing back and like stopping an eviction from happening and pushing back directly on this landlord who was trying to shake down the tenants, and like having a sense that that was a possibility was good. So I think that there is a role for like sort of having that exemplary direct action in the course of a campaign to like push back on, you know, just like landlords violating people's rights. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in response to the question about just like harassment, you know, it's like, yes, certainly. There's like one particular property manager in one building who it's just like, you know, just like banging on people's doors all the time, just yelling at them, like demanding rent collection in person. You know, like there are like places where like, you know, people would have their key fobs turned off, or like, you know, they would, you know, like they would get like hassle and cease and desist letters and like all this stuff. So like what we generally did when like the landlords were just like egregiously violating people's rights is just like, you know, use that as like fuel for the fire. And like in general, it has just like led people to be angrier. So our experience is that like that kind of hassling is like actually good for us. So I invite property managers to be kind of shitty and thuggish. I would also just like counsel people. Like I've seen like a couple chats sort of about like your legal rights. And like, I legit can't tell you. Like, I know what your rights in DC are. I have some sense of what your rights in Prince George's County are, and in like the Northern Virginia jurisdictions. And like in Northern Virginia, you don't have any, like the rights are like really limited. Like there isn't really a legal right for organizers to be there. Like, or like it's just arguable. Like, it's much easier for cops to throw us off properties in Virginia. And they've done it. And, it's just like, sometimes you have to defy the law. That's one thing. And like, but you should like do the research where you live and where you're organizing to figure out like, what protections do you have and like, what can they actually do to you if they want to retaliate? Yeah. So unless someone has like an extremely burning question, Harriet, if you want to get on Stack, you can get on Stack.
It's not a question so much as a comment relating back to a discussion earlier about the gap between tenants themselves and the leftist activists. Mm-hmm. And so one thing that I every once in a while reflect on is this about me and my need to do something and see something happen and be fulfilled myself? Or is it because I have a real belief in building worker power, tenant power, and seeing the system change? That makes it easier for me to take a little bit more of a backseat, go a little bit slower while they're learning how to help themselves.
Yeah, I think that that's a good point. And like, patience is like a thing we have to teach a lot, and just like, like letting things evolve at the pace that people are willing to take action. All right, I think this is going to be my final question. It's a good one. I'll speak to this COVID stuff real quick, and then we're going to shut down a little early so I can get to our organizing cookout. So yeah, obviously the like things are a little weird now because of the whole like global respiratory virus pandemic. And like lots of people have a lot of like very valid fears about like in-person organizing stuff. And so just like all the tools of like an organizer are a little bit more fraught. So like, I will say like today, we are doing lots of in-person stuff. Like we are doing lots of door knocking. I'm going to go to this cookout. Like we have outdoor meetings at buildings. We keep things like outdoors. Like we don't do like large groups inside. Like we have people wear masks all the time, but like, like we're doing like social stuff and like, I think a lot of people feel like they're pushing up on like the boundaries of what's like what they feel totally comfortable with. I think it's like, people are all over the place on it. And like, some people don't want to like, it's like, but like, we're I think drifting more towards like less, like more like we're getting people together in person. I think as the winter months hit, like we're going to probably have to fall back a lot more on doing like tele-organizing. So like, we did do a lot of Zoom meetings at first. As I was saying earlier on, like Zoom meetings require a really high level of commitment from people to like bother to download the app and get on and like participate. Most of the people we're organizing like aren't very familiar with this like mode of social interaction. So it's just like, it's like, it's tough. You really have to like walk people through it and organize them first. I think that like there was a way in which like not being able to do door knocks and not doing in-person meetings really early on forced us to rely on people's social networks and like forced us to just like get people to like call your neighbors, text your neighbors, like figure out a way to communicate with your neighbors. And that meant that we identified much more quickly, like who are the people who already had a lot of neighbors in their phone? Like who are the people who already had like some social structure around? So like we, for the first couple months, we were like not saying like, go talk to your neighbors by knocking on their door. We were saying like, call your neighbors, like whose phone number do you have? Who could you get in touch with? And so like, and then, we were just sort of like organizing virtually for a long time. And that like ended up being much more successful than we thought it was going to be at first. And I think it was just because like, we like just going out and like canvassing and like having meetings does not mean that you're actually building relationships with people. And like, identifying leaders and building a structure that can mobilize lots of people. So a lot of time, like canvassing and like meeting and like, it can be sort of like, you know, you can fill your time up with it, but you're not actually like building much of anything. We were in a situation where like by necessity, suddenly we're like building stuff and we're like forming relationships and we're relying on the relationships that people already had. And so we had to be satisfied with like having a lot fewer people than we'd like be involved and like really focusing on having like meetings. Like we would like do a lot of talking to like top leaders and like have meetings of top leaders, but for the most part, people were just sort of like recruiting neighbors to petitions and then other actions and like dropping banners and eventually rent striking through just like their social networks. And that meant that like, it wasn't like the structure wasn't visible, but it was really there. So I think it is possible to do this under like extreme like social distancing measures, which we might all be under again soon. But practically we've also moved to more in-person stuff. Honestly, it feels nice despite it being a little bit unsettling, and we got a lot more people out. Yeah, anyway, I think unless anyone has like a final question they need me to introduce, I think we're pretty close. I'm gonna wrap up here. Thanks everyone for getting on. I hope this was helpful. Sorry about the technical difficulties. And yeah, I look forward to more exchange in the future. So thanks for coming and talk to you all soon.
Thanks.
Thank you.